Shannon Palus, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. Let's just start high level. Tell me what was the Good Fit project? What was it and why did you do it?
Yeah, so Good Fit was an exercise column at Slate that ran for the duration of 2023. And we were trying to help our readers find better ways to exercise.
And why? I mean, everybody's got exercise columns. Well, what did you think you had to offer that was new and different?
Yeah, so a lot of exercise columns that are out there are, following exercise news. So saying, oh, there's a new study that says if you bounce on a trampoline standing on your head, you'll increase your immunity and live longer. And it was done in 10 people in Finland. And here are 4 tips to take home. And here's how to do like the trampoline head exercise so you too can boost your immunity. It's a very silly example, but, like giving very specific instructions based on studies. And then the other thing is a lot of columns focus on how to exercise to lose weight or get abs or, 10 workout moves to fit into your wedding dress, that kind of thing. So we set out to do a column that was based in science, but not following kind of the play-by-play. There's a new study in a journal, and this week it says exercise helps you live longer, and the next week it says, oops, exercise doesn't help you live longer. We were really trying to take a science-based view of exercise, but one that was really pulled back. And an important component of that is a lot of columns out there focus on, exercise to make you look good and exercise to make you healthier based on metrics like weight, waist size, years you live. And we said, okay, but exercise fits in and enhances your life on so many more like axes than those. Like it helps you set goals. It makes life worth living. It can put you in a good mood. Maybe one kind of exercise kind of bums you out, but another is going to help you find a new community of friends. So we wanted to take a wider view of exercise.
As you probably know, we run an occasional series on this show, and this interview is part of the latest installment of this series, and the series is called Get Fit Sanely. And it sounds like you had the exact same idea.
Yes, the exact same idea. And I like that you said occasional series because that gels with some of the goals of Good Fit. We ran it for 1 year only, and it was pretty popular, but we said we're not going to keep trying to find new angles into exercise week after week for eternity, like until Slate blows up. We're going to do a limited run, and then we want readers to stop reading Slate exercise columns and go out and try stuff.
What would be enough to get you to revive the series? Would it have to be some like significant advance in the science, a new understanding?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I would say that I could see myself coming back and doing this column again in like 10 or 20 years under a different cultural landscape of fitness. When something has replaced Peloton, some way of exercising has replaced jogging. People are finding events to rally around other than marathons and pickleball. For me, Good Fit was a column about the culture of exercise as well as the science of exercise. And the science of exercise actually changes pretty slowly. So, maybe in like 20 years, some scientists will be like, I think probably not. But some, maybe they'll be like, all that stuff we said about protein and strength training, like we've had a weird breakthrough. So that would be interesting. But just if how exercise fits into our cultural conversation shifts, then that would be a reason to revisit it too.
Your essential view, and you stated this explicitly in the series of columns, is that we're in the midst of a glut of information.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to add to that unnecessarily.
We don't want to add to it. Yeah.
We're going to go through the 5 bottom line lessons, the 5 takeaways that you that you really arrived at after both editing this series and writing many of the columns for it. But let me just stay at a high level for a second. One of the things you talk about is that, and here's a quote from you or from the series, a lot of what we've been taught about fitness is actually diet culture wrapped in spandex, which is a great line. Can you unpack it?
Yeah. So I think kind of a top line that a lot of people have about exercise is that it's something that helps you lose weight. Or if not lose weight, like get abs or get a certain kind of waist. And the thing is that exercise is actually a pretty poor way to lose weight. It's very hard to lose weight in general. The main way to lose weight is to go on a semaglutide drug like Ozempic. Um, Exercise can fit into weight loss plans in some ways, but in general, exercise is not going to live up to the promise of making you into a different shape of human being. And I think we're promised that by a lot of exercise products, even when they're not saying specifically, this is going to make you hot. Like if you take Peloton classes, they're talking about mood and strength and making time for yourselves. But the instructors look a certain way. And kind of the implicit message is like, you too can like maybe like have some little slice of this Peloton instructor hotness if you do it enough. And that's just like not true by and large. Um, I run marathons, and the first time I ran a marathon, my friends were like, "You're losing weight. You look great. It's the marathon." And I was like, "No, because I'm going through a breakup with
Huh.
a long-term partner and I can't eat." Like, it's not the marathon.
All right, I have so many questions here. On Peloton specifically, let me just full disclosure, they are not now a sponsor of this show, but they have been in the past, and I do use Peloton. Having said that, I'm not shilling for them in any way in this moment. They do, however, have some larger bodied instructors. I'm just not sure they use them in the ads.
Cool. Yeah. I will say I'm actually a huge fan of Peloton, even as I have the little like note, or not even note, observation. It's fun to work out with hot instructors. Haven't seen them in my use of the app. Doesn't mean they're not there. Don't want to, and but I don't mean to pick on Peloton either. This is everywhere. This is like you go to Equinox, you go to a yoga studio, like, yeah.
Yeah, if you look at Peloton, there's a teacher named Christine Dercole and at least one other teacher whose name I think it's Jen Sherman, both of whom are a little older and not pathologically lean. So just to say in their defense, but again, this is
Sure.
dicey area because I'm a fan of it, and also they have sponsored it in the past. So we
Love
may end up cutting
Peloton.
this.
I use Peloton all the time. Yeah.
But this idea that exercise cannot get you to lose weight or change the shape of your body. I mean, I have so many feelings about and so much sort of small t trauma in my own life around trying to wrench my body into a certain shape and it being frustrating and unconstructive and leading to self-loathing and all that stuff. Having said that, I do know that if I do certain types of exercise, certain types of weightlifting, swimming, for example, I can see a change in my musculature. So it's not true that exercise has no impact on our bodies.
Right. That's fair enough. Yeah. And I would agree with you that, like, I went through a hot yoga spurt all winter. My abs look a little bit different, but it's not. And certainly there are bodybuilders out there or people who get in shape for Marvel movies, who work out with a personal trainer for 2 hours a day and revise their diet. I think the thing that can feel frustrating as a consumer of exercise media and exercise products is the promise is to be born into like a new type of person or a new shape with like, you know, the CDC recommended 150 minutes a week and like generally eating fruits and vegetables. So yes, you can alter the shape, but it's not to that extreme level.
What's your view on whether we should be trying to alter the shapes of our bodies at all?
I personally think people should do whatever they want, but I would say that I would pitch to people that the main benefits of exercise are not in altering the shape of your body.
What are the main benefits?
The main benefits are probably unique to each and every person, but it can have a huge impact on your mood. It can give you a sense of purpose and a goal, can take you away from your computer. It can help you learn to fail at something in a safe environment where the stakes are zero. Because, if you don't run that 5K in under 30 minutes, under 25 minutes, under 20 minutes, doesn't affect your income, your relationships, anything. You can learn new skills.
Maybe I'll say a little bit about my view on trying to change the shape of your body, which is a work in progress, and just see how it goes down with you.
Sure, that sounds great.
Meaning my view is a work in progress, but I've been deeply influenced, and I've said this many times on the show, by a woman named Evelyn Tribole, who's the progenitor or co-progenitor of something called intuitive eating, which you can think of as an anti-diet, meaning the data show, she would argue, that dieting is usually a good predictor of future weight gain. So
Yeah.
diets don't work generally. Um, and that instead of trying to wrench your body into a certain shape, you should make peace with your body, have a good relationship with your body. That doesn't mean resignation and eating Fritos in perpetuity on the couch. It means tuning into how does your body feel when you eat certain foods? Can you learn to listen to your body in a way that you know when you're hungry and know when you're full and not eating for emotional reasons? Uh, can you have a sense of what's good for you based on the data and science around nutrition, but not rule out entire groups of food because you're labeling them in moral terms as sinful? Um, and when it comes to exercise, can you move because it confers the benefits that you just listed, but not with the agenda of conforming to rather a certain rather random aesthetic standard that has been sold to us through the culture, rather than underlying measures of health, which are what really matters, like your blood pressure, your resting heart rate, et cetera, et cetera. So I really believe all of that. And yet I notice sometimes when I'm exercising, I am looking at my body and with critiquing the fact that X area doesn't look the way it looks on my favorite Instagram influencer or whatever it is. So that's happening, but I think the sane part of my brain is really trying to turn the volume down on that and exercise for the reasons that you've listed, not because I'm trying to, conform to societal standards that are unrelated largely to true underlying health.
Right. I agree with all of that. And I want to point out a little caveat to exercise doesn't change your body, because it does. Like, if you lift weights, you will get more muscles. And like, I can notice when I'm running a lot that like my legs like looked a little different, but it's not like, oh, they suddenly like look like a supermodel's legs. It's like, oh, all of this running, I just like feel like my body getting stronger. I notice like if I'm shaving with a razor, like the terrain is different. And I think that often when we think about what it means to, be a marathoner or to get really into strength training, we don't think about our bodies just kind of shifting on their own, like slightly organic axis, like because of our genes and because of our history and everything. And we think about them sort of, right, edging more towards that like fitness model, which doesn't necessarily happen. I will also say that, like, when I can kind of turn down the volume on that stuff of like, oh, my abs after months of yoga don't look like I like think like yoga abs should look. When I can turn that down and ignore that and just really focus on how I feel after a workout or after when I'm in like a mode of like learning something new or like a training cycle for a marathon, I get what I call exercise goggles, which is I can look at myself in the mirror and like literally think that I look like better than I did previously. And I don't know if that's endorphins or what, but it's like a nice little side effect.
I agree. And I find this so tricky, especially as somebody who's a public figure. I spent decades on TV, and now I'm putting my face all over Instagram and whatever the fuck. So I am looking at the way I look, but I also feel like that's so stupid because what am I measuring myself against? I'm measuring myself against arbitrary standards set by people who do not have my best interests in mind. Um, and and also based in a cultural history that it has many toxic tributaries feeding it. And for example, there's a bunch of research to show that our obsession with thinness was a reaction against in the 1800s against the bodies of black women. Um, so I mean, I'm not sure that's the only reason why we're obsessed with thinness, but yeah, do you see where I'm going here? Like
Yeah.
I both find myself judging the way I look and therefore judging the way other people look in ways that I think are just deeply unhelpful, and think the whole enterprise is unwise.
I agree with all of that. And I want to kind of set that aside and say it's nice to feel like you look nice and it's nice to feel like you look strong. And I don't think that you can 100% divorce those things from the history and the beauty standards and whatever celebrity like is setting the pace with all of this stuff. But just to bring it back to exercise a little bit, for me, like going for a run is an action that makes me feel like I look better, whatever it does to my brain. Getting ready in the morning and putting on eyeliner and blowing out my hair also makes me feel like better about how I look. This is really hard to articulate, but I think that sometimes if you can kind of turn down the volume on like that, like objectively, do I look good today? And just be like, how do I feel? Am I taking actions that make me feel good in my body? Like when you work out, when you do grooming, not for everybody, certainly. And like, that's great. Like, or if you want to do more stuff. Does this make sense?
Yeah, I mean, let me see if I can sum it up and maybe add a little top spin of my own because I think you're onto something here, but I want to make sure I understand you.
Yeah.
One of the quotes I often come back to is from Esther Perel, the great couples counselor and psychotherapist who I absolutely love and admire, look up to. Some things she says, are not problems to be fixed, but dynamics to be managed. And what I'm hearing you say is, yeah, it is true. Beauty standards are completely fucked up and based in arbitrary rules and sexism and racism and lots of other isms that we generally don't want to take part of. And that is the world we live in, right? And they're deep in our molecules, these standards. And so it's okay to feel good about the way you look after exercise or not exercising or after sex or after the proper grooming. It's okay to feel good. It's good to feel good about yourself, even if the beauty standards are corrupt at their core. And so it's like kind of two things being true at the same time. You don't want to you want to red pill yourself and not take the beauty standards too seriously. And it's okay to feel good about how you look.
Right. And I think for me, when I really like can tune down the like objective beauty standards and kind of just tune into how I'm feeling, exercise can offer a way for me to just feel better about myself in general. And that translates to seeing myself in the mirror and being like, yeah, cool. Like, and that's a very like sort of internal feeling. And that's the opposite of like peering at your abs and being like, is this like changing enough? Like, what are the proportions of my face looking like today? It's like the opposite of that super analytical lens.
I think we've landed at a spot of sanity here. Um, so thank you for thinking that through with me. All right. Now, let me ask you about some examples of bullshit that you turned up in your year-long project, myths that you were able to bust. One of them is that we need 10,000 steps. Can you say more about that?
Sure. The idea that we need 10,000 steps, that was a marketing idea. I think it originated with a pedometer in Japan. And, they thought 10,000 steps, that looks nice on this little pedometer. Let's do that. And I have to admit, I'm not up on all of the back and forth of like, I feel like out of the corner of my eye, like every other week, I see a news story that's like, actually, 10,000 steps is the right amount. Actually, 7,000 steps is enough. Actually, you can get away with 6,000 as long as you're doing HIIT exercises on Tuesdays. Um, the point is, it sounds so objective and so like it's very easy to wrap your head around. But it's not there's nothing like it's not as concrete scientifically as you would hope or at all. And it's not going to make or break your exercise routine. So Hillary Fry, in one of her entries for the column, she talks about she hit a step goal of 10,000 steps a day. And it was just kind of like forcing her into this idea that like, oh, I have to be working out all the time for this to be working. And she was like, and then I lowered it to 6,000. And, she didn't like talk to her doctor, read all the studies. She was just like, this is more realistic and this is what's going to help me get moving every day rather than making me feel like I'm going to go out and do this like punishing thing all the time.
We had some experts on the last time we did the Get Fit Sanely series on this show, or the second to last time. I think it was the first time we ever did it, actually, which was 2 times ago. And they said 8,000 steps. And so I have actually, in the interim, my wife got me a new Apple Watch, also not a sponsor of this show. And so I have been loosely looking at my steps and kind of non-obsessively thinking, like 8. I know I don't even think that's etched in stone, the 8,000 number, but loosely thinking it's a good, reasonable North Star am I walking enough on a daily basis? How does that sound to you?
That sounds generally about right. I think that the key here is not etched in stone and having a goal that's going to help you incorporate movement into your day in a way that works. I too will kind of thumb through the steps counter just to see where I am. I also have days where I sit at my laptop all day and do work, and then I go downstairs to the gym next to my apartment building, and I get on the treadmill, and I haven't figured out a way to or I do not even care to like sync myself to my step counter when I'm on the treadmill, and the steps are like abysmal, and I don't worry about it. I would say that getting overly prescriptive about whatever steps goal you set, if you set one, is the worst possible thing to do, though.
Yes.
Like, you don't want to get obsessive over it.
This is another problem not to be fixed, but a dynamic to be managed, I think, which is it's good to know what the latest scientific consensus is about hours you should sleep or steps you should take or calories you should burn or amount you should exercise. It's good to know it, but it's also good not to get obsessed about it, obsessed with meeting it all the time. And that is a bit of a tricky dance. Would you agree?
I would agree. And also, I would push back a little bit on the idea that you always have to be like up on the very latest scientific literature about how many steps you should get because like I kind of know how much sleep makes me feel good. I know, like we all have bodies, we all feel what's happening in them. I know that you're supposed to get about 8 hours. Like I know that like too much sleep is like also going to backfire. But I think that the average person doesn't have to be tracking each development in their research because it's all kind of coalescing around the same thing. which is that you should move your body. You should do it for, the CDC recommended amount is 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity. If steps helps you track it, that's great. But you're not going to make or break your life by getting 2,000 more steps every day or not. You could drive yourself nuts though.
Yes. Two things. First of all, I just totally agree with you. And I was not meaning to indicate that everybody should be up on every little
Sure.
jot and tittle of the scientific research, because science is, if properly understood, an argument taking place in public, and getting too hung up on every new study is likely to just drive you crazy. You want to kind of generally understand what the consensus is, and then do your best with it in a way that does not lead to obsession, because obsession is what you want to avoid. Well, there are two ends of the spectrum you want to avoid: doing nothing, being sedentary, and being obsessed. And so it's about trying to, in Buddhism, we talk about the middle way. And this really is, I think, what I'm trying to nudge people towards. So having said that, a term that you introduce in this series that might get us to think about the dangers of obsession, the term is healthism.
Mm-hmm.
What does healthism mean?
So, healthism is a term that was coined by a sociologist named Robert Crawford in the 1980s. And he was really pointing to a proliferation around health advice that was happening in newspapers and magazines. And I think you can see that proliferation today, 10 ways to get flexible, 4 steps to yeah, trampoline your way to better immunity, to use the totally made up example from earlier. And that idea was really that we as individuals are the ones controlling the knobs on our health all the time. And we really have a duty to ourselves to be super tuned into those knobs at all times. So I want to live longer. I should start jogging. I want to lose weight. I should do this type of exercise. I want to be happier. I should, consider the pros and cons between antidepressants and taking up swimming. And his point was really that our health isn't entirely up to us. Our health is also up to our larger environments, what's going on in the world, what's going on in our communities, what kinds of healthcare we have access to, if we can afford to see a doctor, if we can afford to switch doctors, if our doctor isn't listening to us, if we can pay out of pocket for a specialist when something is going wrong. One of the most important things I've learned in my own personal life when it comes to health is that sometimes being able to pay for a specialist appointment with an expert in a field, be able to see with someone in New York City, where we have a lot of choice around doctors, that can make the difference between getting the treatment I need and getting a 5-minute appointment with someone who's really overscheduled and really doesn't know how to meet my needs. So all of that stuff that has nothing to do with exercise. I think a really good example of healthism was during the pandemic, weight was a risk factor for having a worse outcome with COVID. So you would see doctors and articles saying, oh, you should lose weight to improve your outcome with COVID. And it's it's not untrue that it's a risk factor, but the larger issue isn't someone's weight. The larger issue is that there's a virus spreading uncontrolled around the globe, and scientists have not yet found a vaccine. And the thing that you have to do right now is hunker down for the vaccine, not try to stop eating chocolate. You're not gonna, yeah, you're not gonna solve the larger conditions of your universe by taking up jogging.
I think that's an excellent point about the fact that we place so much responsibility on the individual for health. And some of that is absolutely reasonable. But there are so many other variables that are beyond the control of any individual. Their genetics, their access to healthcare, their access to healthy food, whether there's a pandemic, pollution in their area, access to nature in their area. I mean, there's so many other variables, and I think it's just important to keep that in mind and to provide some context and perspective here. And it kind of leads me to another observation that I don't know if it's true. It feels true to me. And I don't know if it's an original idea either. Maybe I stole this from somebody else, but I just don't remember who it is. But I feel like, and I'd be interested to hear if you think this is true or at least close to true, this massive increase in emphasis on optimization, especially among men, that we've seen in the last 10 years, where, and I've been that guy, tracking my calories. I haven't gotten obsessed with achieving ketosis, but, I played with that. Tracking my sleep, tracking my steps, working out for a certain amount of time per day, meditating for a certain amount of time per day, and tracking my streaks. It's just like this optimized, quantified self or quantified ego, a little stock market that you're running all the time. What's my resting heart rate? What's my heart rate variability? It feels to me like that in some ways is unconsciously a reaction to the increasing atomization and social isolation of modern society, where you can't rely on the larger world. Communities have been decimated, organized religion, civic organizations decimated. We are bombarded with disturbing information in this super intimate way on our phone. So the world seems less safe. And of course, it seems less safe in part as well because we have less social support. And so optimization, taking the onus onto yourself, getting as fit as possible, seems like a means to achieve agency in an increasingly scary world. Anyway, does any of that land for you?
That really resonates with me. Yeah, we live in increasing precarity, both real and felt, just from the news bombarding us all the time. And I mean, right, the thing forever for women is like, well, girls and women become anorexic because it's a way to control something, because you can control your weight. And, it's not healthy to do that, but you do have control over it. I definitely feel that. And yeah, like, just a lot of thoughts swirling around in my head. Like the idea that, and I think for millennials especially, like when homeownership is really tough and interest rates are out of control, and you got to worry about not buying a house in something that's going to be in an area that's going to be flooded in your lifetime. And like, well, you can control the meat sack that you walk around in every day, or you can feel some illusion. I think it is an illusion to not totally an illusion, because like it's good to eat well, and like I think that like dipping into tracking stuff can be a helpful way to get a read on how things are going, but like really like marrying yourself to it in this very tight way, yeah, can be a way to find control. And it's almost right. It in some ways, I think it does become a little bit like astrology in a way where, like obviously it's not totally made up. Like it's a science column. I'm a science editor. But really just like over indexing, like, well, I heard on this podcast that 8,000 steps is right. So I'm going to get 8,000 steps, and like all is going to be well in my life. I know people aren't thinking about it that reductively, like they're not stupid, but that feels like an underlying thing for me. And of course, you can do all of that stuff and you can still become chronically ill. You can still get cancer. You can still get hit by a bus.
All true.
Kind
So
of dark.
what and dark, but pointing out the truth, whether it's not inconvenient or not, is actually, I'd rather be aligned with what's true, whether it's dark or light, because that is real empowerment.
And it's freeing, because it's like, well, you go for the length of run you enjoy going for, not for like the one that like some paper says you should go for.
Yes. In intuitive eating, there's a lot of talk about gentle nutrition, meaning
Mm-hmm.
having a background ambient sense of what the scientific consensus is about nutrition, but not freaking out about it. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say about exercise. Yeah, it's good to kind of know, and maybe you kind of want to track once in a while, but you have to be gentle about it because you're going to drive yourself crazy. And there is a thing, a real thing called orthorexia, where you get an unhealthy obsession with getting healthy.
Yeah. My uh, colleague, Heather Schwedel, who's a writer at Slate, wrote a piece for the column about trying to do happy baby, the yoga pose, correctly. She said, like her spine when she was in happy baby and yoga was like popping up in the wrong way. And she went on this whole quest to like fix her happy baby form, which is kind of like an oxymoron because like it's happy baby, it's supposed to be happy. And this yoga guy was like, you have yogorexia. Like this whole question is like, I think she did get some tips in the end, if I remember correctly, but it's like getting too locked into like doing the yoga pose correctly um, can be bad.
I asked earlier about examples of bullshit that you uncovered or myths that you busted. Any other examples that come to mind?
One of my favorite columns was Pilates doesn't give you a Pilates body. It was by a former Pilates instructor, no, current Pilates instructor. And she talked about how she got the most compliments from her students when she was like drinking a Diet Coke for her lunch. And she went into the history of Pilates and talked about how a lot of dancers do Pilates. And so that's why we associate Pilates with like long and lean, beautiful people, because that's the population of people that got filtered into classes and started teaching. So I think about that one a lot. I also, in kind of a silly column, Hamilton Nolan wrote a little screed against exercise equipment. And his whole thesis was you don't need to buy anything to exercise. You can just go out and press your body against the earth and do push ups and run down the street. And he kind of took it to like a comical place. But I think that it does have that truth of like, you don't need a super fancy treadmill to work out. You don't need to like buy the Soul Cycle bike. You don't have to have the latest thing. Like you really can start by existing in the world around you.
Let's click on that for a second.
Mhm.
Because I did mention that we were going to talk about the 5 takeaways that you, Shannon Palus, arrived at after editing and also writing for this column for a year. And number 2 on that list was you don't need to buy anything. And you just talked about it a little bit. I mean, I have a Peloton bike and some weights and a few machines and an elliptical in my gym. Am I a moron for having spent the money on all that?
Hamilton Nolan, the writer who wrote this very impassioned screed against exercise equipment, might say so. I would say that if you went out and you were like, I'm going to become an exercise person, I'm going to add the Peloton to my cart, I'm going to add the elliptical to my cart, I'm going to clean out this area of my home, I'm going to have a new habit, and everything's going to go great. Like that, that's kind of the wrong way in. You don't need as much stuff as you think you need, might be the less humorous formulation of that. And one sort of like analogous statement that I have to make there is that paying for someone's expertise can be better in some cases than paying for a piece of equipment. So going to a personal trainer, going to a yoga teacher and doing a private lesson, all very expensive things, but really just learning how to use the machinery of your own body rather than buying the like $3,000 treadmill often can be a more worthwhile investment.
That's a really good point. And I have found that when I'm willing to pay for individual attention, I get injured less frequently because my
Mhm.
form is better. Not that I'm obsessing about doing happy baby correctly. It's more like I'm just not, throwing out my shoulder because somebody's taught me how to do, a bench press the right way, et cetera, et cetera. If you could be less of a dummy than me and buy and spend much less money on, or no money at all on exercise equipment, but spend a little bit of money on how to do um, body weight exercises um, in the proper form, and you're good to go, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's a balance between the two. If you really love running on the treadmill, which I do, and you're not like me and you don't live next to a Blink gym that costs $15 a month, like you can go ahead and buy a treadmill for your home. But you can very easily kind of go wild on the buying stuff side. I've spent a lot of time thinking about treadmills. My last job before Slate was at Wirecutter. And what for one of my articles, I tested treadmills, and I very much came away with the sense that like all you really need, if you really do want a treadmill, you know you'll use it. You know it's going to enhance your life. Like a $400 model is going to get you a lot of the way there, and you don't need to spend over 1,000, many thousands of dollars on a treadmill.
The 10% Happier podcast is available ad-free over on our companion meditation app, which is also called 10% Happier. And you will get the episodes a week before everybody else does. Download the 10% Happier app right now to get started for free. We're going totally out of order in your five in your five takeaways, but you mentioned experts, hiring an expert. Number 3 on your list, and by the way, we still haven't done number 1.
Sure.
But number 3 is experts are often bringing their own baggage into what they tell you. Can you unpack that baggage to be cute?
Experts have their own ideas of what exercise should look like and how bodies should behave. I ran a column by a former personal trainer, and she said that she realized after she quit being a personal trainer, her name's Sarah Kerchak, and she realized that she had kind of been bringing her own obsessiveness into some interactions with clients, like really being like, "Oh no, your elbow should be like this. No, 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 not like that. Like this. Like your form is off." When, maybe their body wasn't just going to move in the way that she thought it should move. And maybe what was helpful for a client in a given scenario wasn't really drilling down into form, but like, helping them get the big picture hang of something or making sure they had a good time in class. And where that came from was her like own obsession with her own form, she realized. So she was kind of passing that on to clients. Um, and again, maybe you're going to see a personal trainer because you want that really specific help with form. I think that it's really important to know, though, that any fitness instructor or trainer that you're talking to, kind of like doctors, they know a lot, but that person is not the be all end all. You can take some of their advice, you can leave other pieces of it. You can say, this person just has a weird idea of what they think our goals should be here, and I'm going to go find someone else.
Yes, that sounds, again, to use this word again, very sane and very both and. Yes, form can be incredibly important. For example, it took me about a year to figure out how to do a freestyle swimming, which I'd been doing wrong my whole life. And learning that was worthwhile because now I don't hurt myself. And I have this
Yes.
whole type of exercise I can do that is easier on the body, easier on my knees and all that stuff. So it was worth doing that because I'm a little bit, what's the word I'm trying to say? From a coordination level, I'm a little bit dyslexic, to use a mixed metaphor. Like it just takes me a long time to learn. But I'm so glad I did that. And I've also gotten mobbed up with certain exercise gurus in my world who had goals and agendas that I think were based on their own childhood traumas or whatever the hell. And I ended up adopting views of the world or goals that really weren't mine.
Yeah, and I think like correcting against injury is a little bit of a different bag. Like, everybody should listen to their physical therapist to maybe a greater extent than the random exercise guru. But yeah, I think it's important to like when a spin teacher is telling you to crank the resistance up because that's what's going to make you feel happy. Like sometimes yes, sometimes maybe not. Or maybe like whatever type of class they're teaching isn't your type of class. They're just people too.
Speaking of spin, what vastly improved my experience on Peloton, and this is scalable to, and I think any type of exercise where you're looking at a screen and you're getting numbers
Mm-hmm.
about your performance. Ironically, it improved my experience and it improved my performance was turning off those fucking numbers.
Yep. Yeah. I don't run with a watch. I have a Garmin watch. I think in one of the early pieces in the column, I wrote that it was just like dead in my apartment. And that was a year and a half ago. And did I, maybe I ran, maybe I ran it, used it for my ultra marathon. I don't know. I don't use it regularly because it drives me nuts. And, um, oh, I think I wore it for a half marathon about a year ago, and you can actually see in so many of the pictures that were taken by, like, Marathon Photo or whatever during the race, I'm, like, looking down at the watch, like, I can't stop looking at it, and it's, like, that's not good, like and I think people have really variable experiences with it, but, like, it's flypaper for me.
Yes, flypaper is a perfect, absolutely. So, for example, for me with Peloton, if I'm trying to hit the what I think are the right numbers early on, I either get hurt because I'm not fully warmed up yet, or I wear myself out. But if I go really slowly, if I have to turn the numbers off, I have to get rid of the flypaper in order to do this. But I have to shut the numbers off on the screen, and then I just do what feels good for my body for the vast majority of the exercise, and then toward the end, if it feels good, I push harder and I end up in a better place than I would have been if I had been tracking the numbers all along.
Yeah. It can really add to the anxiety and really take you out of the experience.
Okay, so again, we're working through the 5 things that you took from this Good Fit series that ran on Slate throughout 2023. We've hit numbers 2 and 3. Let's go back and hit number 1, which is go slow.
So many people work out too hard. They think that I'm going to use running as the example here, but this applies to basically anything. They think that a run that's worthwhile is one, one coach who I spoke to for my piece about slow running said, my clients think that, or she used to think that you go for a run, you come back huffing and puffing and sweaty, and that means you had a good run. And that's not the case. Um, for the piece that I wrote on slow running, which was one of the first pieces we ran in the column, I talked to coaches who are really into what is called polarized training. And that's the idea that actually 80% of your workouts should be really, really easy. And the other 20% should be really, really hard. And that you should really lean into the easy days, like go maybe embarrassingly slowly, run a pace or cycle a pace or whatever that, you wouldn't want to brag about on Instagram. And that's going to give your body just the volume and the mileage that it needs to, complete an endurance event, but even run a 5K. And it's going to give you the kind of active rest to really go hard on your hard days. Now, polarized training is its own little school of thought in the exercise science world. And a lot of scientists argue about like, should it be 20% hard and 80% easy, or 50% easy and 20% moderate and 30% or whatever it is. But the message that I got from talking to all of these folks is that the average person like really associates like a good workout with going hard, when I think across all of these schools of thought, it's something like 40 or 50% of your workouts should be pretty easy to kind of give your body time to recover and just get like gentle mileage in.
That's the first time I've ever heard that. I assumed that breathlessness and exhaustion was what was required.
You want to get some, I mean, it's a balance. Like you want some of those tough workouts, but pushing yourself to the max every time is a recipe for burnout, like physically and emotionally.
I'm just trying to think like how would that work for me? So I try to cross train because I get hurt so easily. So I swim, run, do the elliptical, do Peloton, or if I'm in the city and I can have access to a Soul Cycle, I'll do that. And I lift some weights. And once in a while, I'll do like a metabolic workout, which is like just like jumping up and down and that kind of thing, which is also available through Peloton or whatever. So I try to really mix it up. Are you saying that on 40 or 50% of these days, I should just be going into any given workout without trying to add in some high intensity intervals or trying to hit a certain number or whatever, that I should actually just be doing it for the sheer joy of movement?
Yeah. And I mean, it really depends. Yes. If you're not having a leisurely swim like once a week or like doing a leisurely like session on the elliptical, consider doing that. I also think like we're not professional athletes. We do things in our lives that aren't working out. Like if you're walking around New York City a lot, like, and that's part of your like suite of movement that you do, like I walk my dog a lot. Like I'm not sitting there with a little notebook being like 40% of my workouts have to be slow. Like, you know, there should be some easier components to your workouts. And I think that like this is like I'm picking on Peloton because I love it because I use it so much and I know it so intimately. This is one of the problems with the app and with programs like SoulCycle and with like, I used to go to Equinox all the time when I lived near an Equinox. All of the classes that you take at Equinox is like they really are geared around pushing you and making you feel like you got a good workout.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like Peloton does have recovery runs, and I like them, and if you're listening, Peloton, you should make more recovery runs. And they do have cool down runs. So, like, there are things out there, but it's really and maybe this is, like, part of my fault too, like, when I go to Peloton, what I'm expecting from when I go to any of these resources, like, kinda what you're expecting and what's on offer, gym classes, apps, workout guides, is kind of this, like, you're gonna get a good workout. And I think that we have to be really, like, more expansive on what that means. Um, Steven Seiler is the researcher who is behind polarized training. I believe he lives in Norway now. He grew up in the States, and he says he got to Norway and he was like, "Oh, people will just go out for, like, 2-hour bike rides, like, kinda leisurely bike rides. They'll stop and get a snack, talk to people, see things, and they'll come home, and that will be their workout." And it's sort of this idea that, like, exercise is something that you do in the course of your life and not this thing where you're like, "Gonna go down to the basement gym and, like, punish myself."
It's interesting to watch my mind during this conversation because I'm really resisting it. Intellectually, I completely buy it, so I'm
Mhm.
not resisting it intellectually. I have always thought of exercise the way you just described it. I'm going to go to the basement gym and punish myself, exhaust myself so I can get a good night's sleep, or which often doesn't happen anyway.
Mhm.
But the only way I can measure whether it was a good workout was, the purpleness of my face.
Mhm. Yeah, like, no pain, no gain. Whereas, like, actually doing things that are relaxing or even, like, it doesn't even have to be wholly relaxing, like, when you're doing long runs to train for a marathon or an ultra, like, you can still have, like, kind of a painful goal in mind, like 10-mile run, 15-mile run, 20-mile run, but you're not, like, supposed to be, like, pushing the pace. You're not supposed to be doing that 20-mile run as fast as you possibly can. Um, it really is about getting it in gently sometimes. So, there are, like, all kinds of schools of thought around training that, like, sometimes you push for the last bit of a run or whatever. I mean, so I wrote the column about slow running at the end of 2022, and I was training for an ultra marathon at the time, and I don't think that I would have been able to finish training for the ultra had I not, like, thought about this in this way, had I not, like, been told about this slow running thing by researchers. Because I would go out to Prospect Park in Brooklyn, and I would have training runs that were, like, 4 hours long on a Saturday, 2 hours on a Sunday. That's such a long time. Like, if you're worried about the pace and being like, "Oh, I should be, like, huffing and puffing or hurting," like, you're not it's n the run is not gonna get done. It's such a long run. Like, I really and that's such an extreme example. Most people are not running 6 hour I do not spend most of my life running 6 hours a weekend at all, but I really, like, had to get into this mindset of, like, sometimes the purpose of my run is to, like, support my body on a very long run and make it as gentle of an experience as it possibly can be.
One of my friends, I won't name her because she hasn't given me permission to name her, but she's part of a family that we often take vacation with, and her kids often make fun of her because she runs really slowly. And I think I've never made fun of her to her face, but I think in my mind I was like, "Jeez, what is she even doing out there?" But she's she's got innate wisdom in many ways. So I should have known that applies to this too. But clearly it does.
Yeah. I got into this, like, little world of exercise following this woman named Kim Clark on Instagram. She goes by Track Club Babe, and she has qualified for the Boston Marathon. She and her husband coach runners. She's so like, the name of her, like, running guides are, like, Fast Fall, Fast Marathon, so you get the point. Like, she's trying to get her runners to run really impressive times, and she would always post pictures of herself being like, "Just finished another run, like, with my kid in the stroller at 12-minute mile pace." And 12-minute mile pace is like, that's pretty slow. Like, um, and she was just sharing a lot about, like, how important she felt those slow days were. So that really, like, just, like, seeing her talk about those slow times, like, it really like, I like to think I'm not that susceptible to social media, but it really just shifted my perception of what a good run can look like, or what a run that is, like, helping you achieve a larger goal can look like.
Social media can be used for good, for absolutely. Okay, so we've gone through numbers 1 through 3 on your list of 5 takeaways after having spent a year writing for and editing this Good Fit series on Slate. Number 4 is your schedule and body will change. Be open to rethinking things. Please say more.
Yeah, so that was really a conclusion that came from editing a couple columns, written by Slate's editor-in-chief, Hillary Fry. She wrote a column for me, I think in the first half of last year, that was like, "I've figured my exercise routine out this time." And, Hillary is a certified yoga instructor, and so first of all, she certified yoga instructor, has gone through times in her life, talks about how she's gone through times in her life where she's done yoga, like, all the time. Obviously, if you go through yoga teacher training, you really love yoga. And then she writes about how she would get into this boom bust cycle with exercise when she'd go through a phase where she's always really gung ho about getting on the mat and, like, learning new moves. And then she'd go through phases where she would just, like, not do yoga for, like, 6 months or even a year. Um, so the first time she rethought things once in this column where she kind of came to this, like, what you were talking about earlier, this very, like, I will try to move my body every day. I will be open to what that looks like. Sometimes it's going to be a jog. I have, very, like, sort of gentle nutrition, gentle exercise goals of, like, extending the jog from 2 miles to 3 miles. Um, so that was the first column she wrote. And I think all of that still holds really true. But then in a follow-up piece that she wrote for me, she writes about going to the doctor and the doctor being like, "You're going through perimenopause. You're approaching, this big life change. And you really need to like start incorporating more strength training, not just like yoga, body weight, but like actually like lifting some kinds of weights. And also like you're not eating enough protein to support yourself through this change. So she writes about really like having to add in that structure that she didn't have before and like do strength exercises to support herself as a woman who is getting older. And I think that, you know, that kind of applies to all of us as we go through different changes in our lives or like have schedule shifts or have shifts in interest, like, or have shifts in the results that we're getting from workouts. Like, yeah, being open to adjusting is really important. And I see this a lot with people who um, were competitive in sports in high school or college where like it's actually pretty hard for them to get back into the sport because they were used to having these really like very good times and now they're not 20 anymore and they're not training for a zillion hours a day and um I think it's a really important tenet of exercise to just be accepting that things can shift.
One of the biggest sources of suffering I've done is trying to get the body back that I had in my mid 30s. I had this glorious period of time in my mid 30s where I was not married. I love being married, so that's not what I'm trying to
You
say.
do
But
more
I,
sitting on the couch eating ice cream when you're married.
yes,
Yeah.
I had very few responsibilities. I had an all encompassing job, but I could go to the gym for 2 hours a day, and I was still in my mid 30s. So I was younger. I'm in my mid 50s now, or coming into my mid 50s, and what my body looked a certain way that really conformed to male beauty standards. It does not look that way now, and I have spent untold hours trying to get it back until within the last 5 or so years when I realized that was a fool's errand and I was making myself and people around me miserable. And so it seems like that lesson that I learned the hard way goes right at your point here. Things change, your body's going to change. Adapt rather than cling to things that you can't get back.
Yeah. And I have to be super conscious of that in my own workouts and with my own goals and like, that like it's just going to be harder to hit that marathon time or that half marathon time that you ran a decade ago.
Okay, number 5 on your list of 5 takeaways is sometimes just stop. What does that mean?
You don't always have to be working out. You don't always have to be working out at a certain intensity. Taking a break if things are going down a path that you don't want them to go down, or even if you're just busy, it is fine and it is actually healthy. Um, that lesson came from one of my favorite entries in the column by Jen Miller, who loves running so much that she is, in fact, the author of a book called Running a Love Story. And she wrote about taking a break. Um, I don't know if it was from running entirely, but certainly from training for things after she dropped out of a 24-hour race that was like all about running as many 4-mile loops as you possibly could in 24 hours. Very intense. She does that kind of thing all the time. But she had been recovering from an injury she was kind of trying to push through, and it was a really muddy day, and she couldn't stop crying during the race. And she was like, actually, I'm gonna go back to my hotel, get a cheap, shitty beer, and like do a reset and figure out what's going on. And she writes about how like she runs a lot because she enjoys it. But she said in this particular instance, she was trying to do that race because she was craving that like post accomplishment feeling of like, I've put in the work and now I can finally relax and sleep in and go on leisurely walks with my dog. And she writes about how you actually don't have to earn the right to do any of those things by working out hard. You can just do them. And I really liked that. And it really felt like a nice corrective to a lot of the messages about, pushing through things that we get.
I think this is a quote from you, but you'll correct me if it came from one of your authors. The literature and the rest of the world will have all kinds of things to say about whatever it is you do, but the best reason to exercise is really simple. Do it because you want to.
Mhm. Yeah, I wrote that.
Can you just say a little bit more about that?
I'm gonna go back to running because it's my exercise of choice. Like, I have people say to me from time to time, like, "Oh, I should get into that. I wish I could get into that." And I just don't think you have to. Like, I think that there's a lot of different ways to move out there. There's a lot of different ways to get the recommended amount of exercise. Um, you don't have to do one set of exercises or another. If you decide you're not going to hit 10,000 steps a day or 8,000 steps a day, it's really not going to make or break you. If you decide you don't like doing HIIT workouts, if you never want to run a half marathon, like, we think of all of these really specific things as being healthy, but in reality, you can get the health benefits from exercise and you can get the mood benefits from exercise from doing a lot of different stuff. And you don't have as much control over your health as you think you do. So, doing what is going to enhance your life on a day to day basis is as good a way to figure out what exercise you should be doing versus really trying to lock in on like the optimal spread of stuff.
Well said. We could leave it there, but I do want to. I can't help myself because this stuff is so interesting. Just a couple more questions. Within that last answer, you used the phrase, I think, something like the recommended amount of exercise.
Mhm.
And I remember in our first Get Fit Saintly series, we talked to Peter Attia, who's a friend, and I really like him. But he talked about exercise as being like the bottomless well of longevity potential, and that he was talking about how much exercise he does, and I think it was like 14 hours a week or something like that.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I exercise a bit, but it's not even close to that. Maybe 7 hours a week, maybe.
Mhm.
But that's like if you include the stretching. Um, and so I guess what did you learn about what is the right amount of exercise, and what kind of caution and sanity would you add on top of that?
7 hours is still so much. Um, that's a lot. I would say that for this column, we did not delve into, like, what the optimal amount is in terms of, like, the science of it. The CDC says 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity plus 2 days of some kind of strength training. Um, an epidemiologist who writes for me frequently, Gideon Meyerowitz-Katz, says 20 minutes a day, if not more. But, 20 minutes, that's, like, really different from an hour a day. If you're, using that as a baseline, like, that's in the realm of, like, you're gonna get the health benefits. I think that to go in the other direction, we kind of have this idea that, like, more exercise is better. And one of the things that Jen Miller talked about in her piece about, like, quitting midway through an ultra was, like, if exercise she didn't talk about, like, the aging stuff, but she was like, "If exercise were this, like, panacea for everything, endurance athletes would have these really amazing lives where they're just happy all the time." And actually, there's, like, evidence that, like, anxiety and depression is, like, more prevalent in those groups and, like, you can do a little, like, well, are you more likely to take up these extreme sports if you are to but the point is, like, they're not walking around in a state of euphoria and well-being all of the time. They're like it's like any other life choice. Like, running a marathon doesn't make you healthier. In fact, running a marathon can be a good way to damage your body, like, if you're not taking the proper steps. in terms of how much is the right amount, like beyond just following the general guidance and talking to your doctor and figuring out like what it looks like to fit one amount of exercise or another in your life, like what you enjoy, like really like thinking about, with apologies to the 14-hour exercisers of the week, like more is not necessarily better. Like really, I would encourage people to think about why they're doing that amount. And you could have a really good reason. Like, I love working out. It's fun. But yeah.
Yeah, in his defense, I did press Peter on this, and he said that he really likes to work out. So,
Sure. Yeah.
and I think actually, if my schedule worked, I would work out that much myself. I happen to just like it.
And if you have the time, like, we're
Yeah, I don't.
sitting down a lot during the day. Like, it can feel good. But
I don't know if this line comes from you or from one of your writers, but it kind of sums it up well. The lesson is clear. You can't outrun your problems, and more exercise isn't always more helpful.
I think that's Jen Miller. Yeah. Yeah. It's really true.
One last question. There was an article about how ditching the mirror can improve your workouts. Can you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a wonderful article by Kylie Price, who's a young science writer, and she wrote about there's a gym in Brooklyn called Form Fitness, a lifting gym that specifically like the owner set it up really intentionally so there are no mirrors, or there are one or two mirrors in the corner like for selfies, but not mirrors that like are staring you down while you're working out. I think that's the case. Like that's CrossFit boxes don't have mirrors. A lot of yoga studios don't have mirrors. That's not like a wild thing, but we've all been to like Blink where I go has giant mirrors. You cannot avoid your reflection. Like when you're on the treadmill, you're staring at yourself. And in small studies, researchers have found that people might be more motivated when they're like staring at the reflection, or also they had people look at posters of like people with stereotypically nice bodies. They might feel more motivated. But during the workout, when they're kind of staring at themselves, but they also feel more stressed, which is you just don't want to be throwing that in the mix. And they describe themselves in more like objectifying terms. And the really interesting thing is like you can make an argument for mirrors that goes, well, if I don't have a mirror, how am I supposed to know that I'm doing this lift correctly or this exercise correctly? And the trainers that Kylie spoke to said, well, like having someone observe you and give you feedback or recording yourself and then looking at the recording later are actually both better ways, because you don't want to be like craning your neck or like trying to like adjust everything mid move that can actually backfire. And the overall point here is that like the mirrors kind of put this reason of like working out for your body front and center. You got like really focused on like this is what I look like and like this is what I wish I would look like, and it kind of I've learned to tune it out because like I really like the Blink that I go to. It's $15 a month. It's really hard to beat. I've learned to just like tune out the person staring, the reflection staring at me while I'm running. But it can be really distracting.
It's such an interesting point, and I had experienced that stress from all the mirrors, but not actually noticed that it was the mirrors causing all the stress. So it was interesting to have it, articulated so clearly. This has been great, and I've learned a lot. And kudos to you and Slate for doing this series. Is there something you were hoping to talk about that we didn't get to?
There is one little point that I would like to make, which is that this actually comes from a piece that predated the column. It was by Eleanor Cummins, who wrote about our obsession with super short workouts. You might have seen them in the New York Times loves to publish these. A lot of news outlets like to publish these, where it's like the 7-minute workout, the 4-minute workout, the 3-second workout. they get shorter and shorter. And these stories are all based on little studies of people where it's like, like 25 people did these like 8-second moves in a lab. And it turns out if that you really exert yourself for this short amount of time, you can get the benefits of like doing longer workouts. And this professor of exercise psychology at Iowa State University, uh, Panteleimon Ekikakis, who's a huge critic of this way of thinking, like, oh, like what's the shortest workout you can possibly do? And like, how can you get the benefits like in the smallest dose possible? He's one of the things he's really critical of is the study size that all of these articles are based on, where it's like it's a really small sample size of people. They're in this really unique condition where like most of us are not being like given instructions by a grad student while we're working out. We're kind of left to our own devices. And Dr. Ekikakis said of these studies, you can discover wonderful things, none of which are true. And you can discover wonderful things, none of which are true. And I don't want your listeners to like be discounting every piece of science that they encounter out there in the world. But just remember that like not all studies are created equal. Not all studies are worth shouting from the rooftops about or changing around your life about. Like, that's the process of science. Researchers do exploratory studies in small groups of people to kind of think about like the ways biology could work or what might help us later down the line. Like, we're not supposed to be taking advice from them. Sometimes they're wrong.
Well said. Before I let you go, can you just plug the Good Fit series and any other work you're doing over at Slate that you want people to know about?
Okay, so Good Fit was a column that ran from January 2023 to December 2023. You can read those essays from myself and a variety of contributors and learn some things that are wrong about the way we think about exercise, but hopefully, importantly, leave with a lot of cool ideas about what you could do to switch up your routine or change your perspective on things. Yeah, so check those out. They're really fun. I can say that because I didn't write most of them. I just helped them be the shiniest version of themselves that they could be. Um, I also, so I edit features at Slate. That's one of my roles. And I want to shout out a feature on concussions that a writer named Isabel Whitcomb wrote, published it a couple weeks ago. It's about how doctors, Isabel got a concussion last summer and was told to, you know, sit down in a dark room and like don't move and just let your brain rest. And turns out that's not in line with the latest thinking on how to heal from a concussion. Not just the latest thinking, but like the slow building consensus on what to do, even though a lot of doctors will tell you to do that. So
Sounds like you're doing a lot of good work. So thank you for your time.
thank you for having me. This was really fun.